Hello, everyone. Mandara Cromwell here at the home of Cyma Technologies, where we marry science and spirit through cymatics and the advanced sound technologies of AMI, acoustic meridian intelligence, for total health. I'm very excited to be with you today with our special guest, Annaliese Reid. And you will love what she has to say because not only does she talk the talk, she walks the walk and has walked the walk in her own story. So let me tell you a little bit about Annaliese's background. She has studied and taught personal growth, energetic healing, and consciousness techniques for over 20 years. She has presented at seminars and conferences in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe, and is committed to supporting personal well-being on all levels: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. She is passionate about supporting others in their personal growth and is particularly interested in the effects of consciousness on improving health. Annaliese healed herself of a life-threatening, incurable illness using the DNA research pioneered by biophysicist Dr. Glenn Ryan over 20 years ago. She appeared in the major documentary series Superpower in 2021, in which she describes her experiences. Welcome, Annaliese, to our interview, our wonderful conversation today, where we're going to delve into the patterns and discovery of health. So happy you're here.
My pleasure to be here with you, Mandara. Thank you.
Now, for those who are with us today who have not seen the Superpower pilot, could you briefly give us a background on that powerful presentation of your life experience?
Certainly. The focus of the Superpower docuseries was intuition. And I had had quite a few interesting intuitive experiences throughout my life that were life-changing for me. And so Danny Blitz, the producer and organizer, asked me to appear in the pilot session as the guest speaker in that session. And in that session, I shared quite a few of my life experiences, including my healing experience that took place over 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, my life was very different than it is today. Today, I live in the northwestern portion of England with my love of my life, my husband, John Stuart Reid, whom, by the way, Mandara introduced us more than 20 years ago. We both feel forever indebted and grateful to Mandara. And over 20 years ago, I lived in the northwestern US on Lake Coeur Lane. And it was my personal paradise. I loved that area. I grew up there and really, really loved it. However, at that time in my life, I was in a marriage that should have been expired, past expiration date. And what that was about was I was married to a nice man, but he was 16 years older than me. And our values, our interests had just grown farther and farther apart. And so through the years, we had very little in common, except we both loved our dogs. That was it I could figure out. At that time in my life, I was interested in natural healing and actually working in helping, teaching other people natural healing techniques. And this all kind of came to a head about when there was an instance where there was a teaching group of us on our way to Scotland, to the University of Scotland, to present a weekend workshop of natural healing. Before I left for this weekend, my ex-husband and I came to really have a very serious conversation where our values were really exposed right in my face. I knew that this was not going to work for me to remain in the relationship. And so on the way to Scotland, I had a terrible thought. I felt so stuck. I really loved where I lived. I didn't want to leave, but I knew if I divorced this man, I would be leaving. I couldn't stay there in my paradise. And so this thought was, it would be okay if this plane went down. And I shocked myself. I'd never had suicidal thoughts before. And by the time I reached Glasgow, I thought I had the worst jet lag ever. I felt terrible. I was lethargic, I was achy, depressed. And so much so that every day felt worse and worse when it was time to actually participate in presenting the workshop. I was too ill to get out of bed. By the time the trip was over and I returned back to my home in Idaho, symptoms were really beginning to show up by that time. For instance, when I took a shower, I'd step out of the shower, look at the shower stall behind me, and it looked like my whole head of hair had fallen out, like a wig was on the shower floor. At that time, I had very thick hair, and it was a lot of hair. And hair kept falling out every time I showered. That was the very minimum, though. The symptoms of what came upon me was a very different type of illness, very, very painful. I found that if I simply laid on the sofa every day, didn't move a muscle, I could somehow make it through a day. Otherwise, I was in excruciating pain. My body was swollen and inflamed. My head was swollen. My eyes were half shut. I could barely open my mouth. I had to poke food in. If I fell down, I couldn't get up. I was breathless very easily. If I walked across a room, I'd have to stop, gasp for air. And there were many more. Actually, there was a time when I had to have my fingerprints taken at the police station because I was going to open a little healing center nearby, and they do a background check on everybody. When it came time to give my fingerprints, there weren't any. I had no fingerprints. I didn't know that was possible for a human being to lose their fingerprints, but that's what happened to me. The police were very nice to me. They had never seen anything like it. They suggested I maybe try again. They didn't know what to do with me. Come back in a couple of weeks and we'll try again. But by a couple of weeks, I was too ill to even go back to the police station. I was too ill to think about helping someone else with their healing. And as each day progressed, my symptoms became worse and worse. My local doctors had no idea what to do with me. I knew I needed to see a specialist. My doctor said I probably need to see a rheumatologist. They were full up. There was no appointments to be had for about 3 months. And at the rate my body was not working, I didn't feel I had 3 months to live to get to a rheumatologist. A friend of mine in the nearby town who worked for a rheumatologist squeezed me in without an appointment. She said that I could have maybe 5 minutes with a doctor. He came in, he wasn't happy to see me without an appointment. He looked at my hands and said, "Don't put them in the freezer or you'll lose your fingers," because I had Raynaud's syndrome. I didn't know that. And he said, "Get yourself to the emergency room right away. You're very, very ill." And so I did. And this very kind young doctor spent all afternoon with me in the emergency room. At the end of the day, after conferring with his other doctors, he says, I think you have an autoimmune disease. It looks like it could be a really bad one. It's called scleroderma. You need to get to another rheumatologist to get yourself checked out and diagnosed. I drove myself home after that. And there came a time very shortly after that experience when I began to lose my eyesight. I already could not dress and undress myself. I was basically an invalid, although I refused to go into a wheelchair. I would hobble along the best I could, but I did not ever go into a wheelchair. So when I began to lose my eyesight and I was basically immobile, everything was stiff and painful in my body. Every movement caused excruciating pain. My then husband drove me to Seattle, 6 hours away, where I spent a full week of emergency testing. A week it took for people to figure out what was wrong with me for sure. At the end of the week, I was given my prognosis and a nocebo prognosis, which means there's really not much hope for you, a very negative prognosis and diagnosis. I was told that you have a rare disease called scleroderma. There is no cure for it. Your organs are affected by this disease. They are becoming hard. Your body is shutting down. You must get used to this because you will be an invalid for the rest of your days. You will never have a normal, healthy life again. I feel emotional sharing this with you guys. Feels like I'm right back there. Anyway, as this person was giving this diagnosis and prognosis, I went into shock. We were in a little waiting room, one of those little rooms with a little bed. And I remember her voice was kind of echoing off the walls, and time seemed to slow down. And I wouldn't have gotten angry had I not detected a dark glee as she delivered this terrible message to me. I left that office in shock and called a very dear friend who happens to be a gifted, intuitive, and natural healer. And when she saw me, she didn't tell me, she told me later that she could see that my body was rapidly losing my life force, preparing to die. And so instead of working with her natural healing techniques, she worked with me to let go of fear. All the rest of that day and late into the evening, she called in a friend to help her. Both of them stayed with me and worked with me for the rest of that fateful day. They did very good work because by the time I returned home, 6-hour drive home, I had no fear. She was a very wise woman. She knew that we cannot heal in a state of fear because of all the chemical reactions, the stress hormones that are released in our bodies. The whole cascade of them are released when we are in fear. And so, very fortunate for me, I had no fear. I had rather a clean slate, except I did want to make that rheumatologist who delivered that terrible message to me, I wanted to prove her wrong. I thought to myself, she can't tell me how my life is going to be. This is my life, and I'll be in charge of what happens to me. Thank you very much. And so I had kind of this thing going on in my mind that I really, really wanted to live. I wanted to be healthy, and I set out to do so. Fortunately for me, as Mandara mentioned, I ran across a scientific paper. It could have been from you, Mandara, all those years ago. I don't remember for sure. It could have been by Dr. Glenn Rhine, the biophysicist who had done DNA research with HeartMath Institute. He found out some very interesting things about how we can reprogram our DNA. I didn't know that. It was still during the time. This was 1999 when this happened. It was still during the time when we were all being re-educated about DNA. Up until that time in the 90s, there was the firm belief that we're born with our DNA. It's the blueprint of our lives and we're stuck with it. That is so not true. Thankfully, our DNA is very programmable. And what I did when I read Glenn Rhine's paper about his research, I read it several times so I could understand it. And then I proceeded to make a list of things that I just felt in my gut, in my heart of hearts, would help me heal. And I created what's called today the DNA Reprogramming Protocol. All of the key elements I pulled out from his paper, and I used it several times a day on myself. Because I knew that if I didn't apply myself and use every spare moment when I was awake, I slept a lot at that time. I slept 16 to 18 hours every day. So during my awake hours, I would work on myself. And the DNA reprogramming protocol was a key element for my healing. I would use it especially when I received negative news from the doctor's office. I would go in every week, have my blood drawn, have different tests done on my body. And I often got not so great news, like my blood pressure would be high enough to have a heart attack, or my liver enzymes would be off, or you've lost half your kidney function, Annaliese. Sorry about that, from the disease. There was often quite a few very stressful elements that I was given. I would return to the DNA reprogramming protocol and take myself through it. And it seemed to make quite a difference for me. Another thing I did on a very regular basis was work to resolve unresolved issues. I came from a traumatic, abusive background as a child and as a young adult. And I thought I had worked pretty hard on those things and moved beyond them. I saw at that stage in my life, there was still much more to go for healing and letting go of those things. So I had a technique I used, not as effective as what is available today, which is the EFT Emergency Freedom technique, which is marvelous for letting go of post-traumatic syndrome, traumas in the body or the consciousness. I wish I'd had it back then, had that technique, but the technique I had that I was actually teaching was a huge gift because I could see, even though I was humbled, I was embarrassed that I was being told that I was going to die for being someone involved in natural healing. I thought, this has really brought me to my knees, so much so. But then I saw the perfection of it, that I could actually use for myself the things that I was teaching. And so this technique was one of the things I was presenting to other people to use for their healing. And I had seen quite a few people heal from what looked like impossible situations. So I knew it was possible.
Thank you for sharing that, Annaliese. I know that was really tough to go back into that time and share. So many people that come to us at Cyma Technologies have conditions that they have received a diagnosis similar to what you received. And, you know, they have questions like, how did this happen? What should I do now? That dictate that the doctor gave to you in that small little room is really powerful. saying, you're just going to have to figure this out and live with it for the rest of your days, is really a powerful punch. And that was received after, months. I imagine it's months that that first airplane ride over to Glasgow happened. Or what was the timing between
That
the
was right on the cusp of becoming ill. That's why I thought I had the worst jet lag ever. The Glasgow trip happened before the illness took hold. It was right on the edge of it. And I believe that took hold at that time because my husband at that time and I had exchanged words that really showed the huge gulf between us and that it was time to move on. I had been staying because I loved where I lived, and it was a huge choice for me. It put me in a quandary. What should I do? So I stayed. He was a good man. He wasn't unkind or anything. It's just that what he thought was important in life was so vastly different than what I valued.
Wow. So it was at that conversation before
Mhm.
boarding the plane that you became
Yes.
conscious
Yes.
of this. Was there some brewing prior in the previous months or maybe even years, a little
Yes.
nudging that you look back on and say, oh, wow, it was then
Yes.
that I was being tapped on the shoulder?
Yes. I would say about 5 years before this, Mandara.
Yes, very
I was
interesting.
constantly stressed because of this marriage that was not working any longer. I didn't realize it was kind of subtle. It was sort of like that's just part of my life, just dealing with this. And thankfully, I know this sounds rather mean, but he traveled most of the time, so I was not in his company that often. And so I think that's how I made it through for about 5 years prior to this. We were not in each other's company very often. But it was continual stress. And apparently it got to a point with that conversation that it broke things apart for me. Yes.
Powerful, powerful. We find that in the people that we work with when they have a significant health challenge,
Mhm.
that of course we use sound, and we're not offering a course like you're offering to help people dig deeper. We just allow people the space to use the AMI devices, and the sound very gently allows these um, intuitive hits to bubble to the surface. And then they have an opportunity to say, maybe I should look further here. And that's where, people like you, your course helps people delve into, I think I want to look at this more closely. So thank you for sharing your story.
Sure.
And certainly when the punch hit when you were in Glasgow and coming back, um, you still had the will to open your wellness center, even though you yourself were having the physical expressions of like, hey, Annaliese, slow down, take care of me, your body. You still had that service attitude that you wanted to help others. And
Yes.
that is to be commendable, because that shows the person who you are deep down. But then you had the tap on the shoulder like, hey, I can't do this, I really need to take care of me. And was that hard? Were there feelings of frustration and anger, and what was
Especially when I
going on
found out
then?
no fingerprints. I mean, what do I do with that? I had no idea what was going on with me. And by the way, just as an aside, from that fateful day that rheumatologist delivered her nocebo prognosis, 6 months later, I was totally healed, all except for my hair having grown back. I was still pretty bald. I had my hairdresser just shave it because it just kept falling out and falling out. I had a few little sprigs of straw on this round bald head. I kind of looked grotesque, to put it bluntly. My friend who helped me that first day once asked me, she said, Annaliese, did you ever have your photo taken so people could believe how sick you were? And then she caught herself and says, no, they wouldn't. They'd be crazy to have taken your photo. And she was right, because I hardly recognized the face that was looking back at me. When I returned from that trip, a neighbor of the month of the week, pardon me, the week of testing, she came to visit me, and she broke into tears when she first saw me because she hadn't seen me for a few months. So that's how misshapen my body was. Very, very not like me today. But
Well, it is a powerful story. And then how did you, I guess it was the help of that friend, because our support systems are so
mhm,
crucial,
yes,
very important to have supportive people around us when we're going through these valleys, these deep, dark crevices.
yeah,
Um, that somewhere within you, you recognize the will to live, the hope that there was something else. Can
mm,
you share a little bit about that? What did that
sure.
take? Days, weeks, or it was instantly when you were with your friend and they were doing the fear removal, right? Or tell us a little bit about that, because sometimes people stay in that feeling of there is no hope for
Yes,
quite some time.
yes. That is a whole another story, Mandara, and I'm not sure you want to get into it, but I had a very good reason to want to live. It has to do with intuitive downloads I'd received throughout my life. Oftentimes, these were life-changing events for me. So I'll go ahead and share it with you since you asked. And I think it's vitally important for anybody on their healing journey to know why they want to live. What is your passion? What do you want to experience in your life? And for me, I had a very clear one. So I began having what I call, for lack of a better term, downloads, psychic downloads. It just came spontaneously. Perhaps you and your listeners have them also and know what they're like. My first one was at age 12, when I was afraid I wouldn't live to be an adult. I had to return back to my home from after spending the summers with my grandparents. And I was afraid in my 12th year of life, I wouldn't make it, that I would be done away with. And I received this very strange circumstance. I was walking along the railroad tracks, taking the mail to my grandma, when suddenly the air kind of shimmered in front of me. And there was this woman. She looked quite old. She looked about the same age as my mother, someone in her 30s. And she said to me, you are loved. You will live. It was a very short, cryptic message, and then she was gone. And then later it occurred to me, I was looking at myself. Somehow I'd had kind of a time warp and was assured that I would live and make it to adulthood. I didn't share this with anybody because I was afraid that people would think I'm crazy, especially my family. And those types of things happened for me for quite a while, quite a few years. When I first became married to the ex-husband, I received 3 different downloads in a row, 3 mornings in a row, spontaneously upon awakening. And these downloads showed me that there was a particular person, this man, who was to become my life partner, a sacred relationship that we had important work to do. And it was also just wonderful. The sensation was like stepping into like heaven. I didn't want to come back to my normal life from those downloads. And so that was the reason that I wanted to live, because every single download I had experienced came true, even life saving for me, some of them. And I really wanted this, the essence of this download stayed in my psyche over 25 years, and it hadn't happened yet by the time I became ill. I knew it would happen because I was shown that it would happen later on in life. And so that was one of my passions for wanting to live. Also, as an aside, my husband at that time didn't, and nobody in my family believed that I would live through this illness. He wanted to sell our lake home, move to an apartment in Seattle by the hospital, so we would be handy for it when the time came when I got really, really ill. My sister flew up from Florida to say her final goodbyes. They all believed what the medical profession said: there's no cure for this disease, expect to die. But I knew I wouldn't die because that download had not come true, had not played out in reality. Now, it doesn't have to be something that dramatic. I doubt that many people have that type of dramatic experience. Maybe it's something even more dramatic, something more passionate for them to live for. But it's really important to know what that thing is, or things. A lot of times people would simply love to see their grandchildren grow up, maybe become married, graduate from college, what have you. Doesn't matter what it is, just so you have something that touches your heart, that makes that passion come alive within you.
Wow, that is powerful, Annaliese. You know, it's just goes to show, similar to you, I had a lot of experiences seen into the invisible world as a child. And I think for the most part, we're told to cut that off. You know, that's just living in an imaginary world. And, you know, I spent a lot of time studying Ayurveda, and in Ayurveda, we view disease as really just a disorder or an opportunity to come back into our full expression of body, mind, and spirit, of the physical, the emotional, psychological, and the spiritual experiences that we have, that we're so gifted to be here on this planet at this time. And when we can remember those experiences that really touched us, and your story is just so beautiful, holding that anchor that really connects you to your passion. So thank you so much for sharing that. Do you think that, I know, as you mentioned, not a lot of people have these
Yes.
lightning bolt experiences, but I do believe they have little nudgings along the way. And I know you've taught your course and you've been in this particular type of service for over 20 years. Do most people, when they come really to the realization that they can have a hand in repatterning their existence, do they remember some experience of the invisible world when they were children? Or what is the percentage of people that connect way back then to what their soul's purpose is?
It usually takes some work, some intention, because so much of our lives are ruled by our subconscious minds, and our subconscious minds are full of programming from our parents, our family, teachers, whomever we look up to as children. And so it takes some techniques quite often to be able to dig in and find what those things are, because quite often the subconscious beliefs, attitudes, feelings are what hold us back, those very things. And so there are tools that people can learn to begin to become in touch with themselves. Nobody, I don't think any of us remembers or knows that we are born perfect beings, magnificent beings. And as life would have it, we also absorb everything we see and hear from adults as children and take on programming and make it our own beliefs, our own thoughts, our own feelings. And it feels like we move through life primarily to unburden ourselves from those things. Quite often they're wonderful programming, things that we want to hold on to, but quite on the other hand, there's often quite negative programming. Things like I'm not good enough, or I can't heal, other people can heal, not me. And on that note, I want you to know there's nothing special about me. If I can heal, anybody can heal. And I see it happen quite often. People healing from what looks like impossible circumstances. So,
Gosh, that is, you're just empowering everyone to break those patterns that are holding them back.
mhm,
You know, in my research and in my lectures, I always show cymatic patterns
yeah,
because we can see these vibratory holds that are expressing in our speech and maybe, well, definitely registering on our cellular membrane. And so when people really see cymatics for what it really is and how it impacts us
mm,
on a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level, it's a huge aha. And you are offering the opportunity to get an inside view of what that pattern might look like and how to shift it.
yes,
So thank you. So, we could talk for a long time here,
yes,
but the gist of everything is that you have empowered yourself to recover from an incurable illness. And basically within 6 months
mhm,
of doing the work and
yes,
keeping focused on that, moving through the veils of constriction, and you have created a course to help people. So can you tell us a little bit about the course and maybe give us a few tips for our listeners that how they might start taking steps to breaking the patterns that they want to move beyond?
certainly. Did I tell you how the course came about? Did I
No, tell
mention?
us. That
Oh,
that that's
okay.
that would be
Forget
great
what I
too.
told you.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
because everything is a choice of developing a pattern. You're moving from one pattern into another. And, in Ayurveda, we see it as the creative process, that it's like a flower that blooms continuously. And every year it's slightly different. And so when we move into this new pattern of opportunity that we have, you know, made an intention, hey, we want to do this and not that. I want to give up that pattern and I want to see what the possibility is for a new pattern. So please tell us, how did
Okay.
this pattern evolve in your life? Because I know that there are tons of people out there with gifts that the world really needs.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so please tell us how it evolved.
It evolved because of my husband, John Stewart Reid, who is an acoustic physics scientist and researcher. He was invited to participate in the Superpower docuseries. And when he learned that Danny Blitz, the producer, wanted to find people who had intuitive experiences that touched their lives, he said, "You should talk to my wife, Annaliese." And that's how I became invited through John. And at that time, John and I were traveling quite a bit. He was doing speaking engagements all over the US, England, Europe, even South Africa. And I wanted flexibility in my life. So I began to work as a book editor. I'm also an introvert. I'm not very apparent on social media. I am an introvert. And this worked well for me to be just working away at my computer on other people's work. When Danny asked me to share my story, of course, part of my story was the healing experience I had. And many of her listeners also had chronic diseases, and they began trying to find me, which wasn't easy for them, bless them. They finally found me through Danny or through John, because I have a Facebook site, but I rarely look at Facebook, don't even go on there. And so they came and asked me, "Would you please show us what you did, teach us what you did, so we can heal too?" And so what I did was I formed a very small group, a test group, so to speak. And I didn't have a course written. I wrote the course material from week to week based on what I saw the need would be for them to learn. And it seemed to work very well. And from that, the course really grew. And many people have been through it. So that's how it started, from nothing to something today. Yeah.
A Queen Spirit, I would say. You were divinely guided with some prominent people in place who were pushing you.
Yes. Look that way.
Oh, that is great. Well, tell us a little bit about the course. Um, as I mentioned, a lot of our owners of the AMI devices, some of them are interested in delving a little deeper. And so for those who are interested in pursuing moving at a faster clip, could you share a little bit about your course?
You bet. By the way, I also did use sound, even though I knew nothing about sound healing 20 some odd years ago. I listened to sacred chant every day I was awake. Krishna Das, Deva Premal, Jonathan Goldman were my go-tos for listening. Today, I love the AMI 750. I use it about every other day just to kind of keep my body toned up. And it feels so good after I use it. I'm so grateful to Mandara. She does the work that she does. She has such a pure heart. And you guys are really, really fortunate to have her as your support person. Because I don't know of a wiser person when it comes to healing techniques than Mandara. And I know she has so much to share with you. When I use the AMI 750, John reminds me that the sound frequencies coming up through my feet are converted to electricity by the piezoelectric effect in all the nerves of my body. And this electricity energizes my body. It's a wonderful device. I can't speak highly enough about it. Now, back to the course. One of the key things that is taught in the course is the DNA reprogramming protocol that I wrote all those years ago. When I first healed, word traveled all across the USA. This woman healed herself from an incurable disease. I received calls from people. I remember as far east as Chicago. I was living in northern Idaho at that time, and they expected something magical. What pill did you take? What did you do to heal? It had to, they were looking for some magic way to heal their bodies. All I could think to offer them was the protocol I had written. But when I sent it to them, I found that there was no success stories with it, because these people were simply people off the street, that were ill, and they had not done any personal growth work. They had no foundation to work with. And so that is why, that is primarily a big portion of what the course is about, is preparation, so that when you get to the DNA protocol, reprogramming protocol, you can use it successfully. Unlike these poor people all those years ago, they weren't successful because they had no way of knowing what they needed to know. We don't know what we don't know. And back then I was very naive. I wanted to help, but I obviously what I did was not helpful for them. So that is a key thing. And the course comes in sessions, 6 of them, 4 sessions before you get to the DNA reprogramming in preparation, things to have as a foundation to use it successfully. And there are all kinds of things that are covered. We're going to have a live annual course beginning in October, which is going to be extended from the online course. The online course is great, has the basic information about it. Each session is about an hour. The live course is about twice that long, about 2 hours, with more information. We go a little deeper. And there'll be more of a sense of community, which is really important. You mentioned that, Mandara, having people on the same wavelength as you are. Sometimes people are by themselves going through a healing journey, like me, not having a family that believed in them or that they could heal. They just believe the medical information, which can be very helpful if we have an emergency. But often for chronic diseases, there are no cures. They work to help us alleviate the symptoms, but there are no cures. So what you offer in the way of sound, working with the intuition, with consciousness, is how we heal. It's how we heal. And so, of course, talks about ways to become conscious of what we're believing, how we can shift them, shift beliefs that no longer work. Things like the vagus nerve, basic information about physiology is covered, enhancing the vagal tone, enhancing nitric oxide in our bodies. That's in the first session. We talk about the field and how we're all a part of that field. That we live in a quantum world. We're way past Newtonian physics. That we have this beautiful, I love this energy pattern that's all around our bodies, all around every living system, which is the torus. If you haven't seen the torus, I don't know, if you see it, perhaps you'll fall in love with it like I do. I just love the torus. There's even torus, Glenn Ryan found, there's the torus energy around every single element of our DNA. There's the torus around our DNA, around our heart field, and around our bodies, around our planet. It is around all living systems. So we discussed that in the course. We talk about how to use EFT and why to use it. It's good for physical as well as emotional challenges. Trying to think of what else. There's 6 sessions, as I mentioned, and a bonus session for free.
How powerful.
Those are
I
just
just
introductions.
feel your sharing about it is just very moving, and I so feel your heart coming right through across the pond on the other side of the Atlantic. Um, to participate in your course is really a gift. And as Annaliese mentioned earlier, I have known her for, I have drawn upon her expertise, her friendship, the love from her heart for over 20 years. And it's just such an amazing gift of genuine love that she brings forth in her work. And I just want to encourage everyone who is listening to this, whether you're an AMI owner or not, to investigate Annaliese's work. And just as we close here, I want to say Annaliese is currently writing a memoir as well as facilitating this DNA reprogramming course in which the healing methods she applied to herself are covered in detail to support others in their healing energy. And her course can be found at dnareprogramming.online. And we'll have that website attached to the email and postings that go out with this particular conversation. Annaliese, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close off? It's been such an enriching experience for me, and I just feel all these vibrations of the people who are going to learn so much from this sharing that you've provided for us.
Thank you, Mandara. I just would like to remind everybody, if I can do it, you can too.
That is so empowering. What a gift. Just those words alone. Thank you so much, Annaliese. So much love to you and to everyone in their healing journey. And though the road may be bumpy, reach out to all of us. Definitely to Annaliese at DNA Reprogramming and at Sima Technologies. We're here to support you in your journey.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Much love to you and to everyone.
Love to you, Mandara, and all your listeners.
Till next time.
Till next time.